So, we find ourselves on this Climate Sunday, and we find ourselves conveniently, as if it had been planned, on the 5th mark of mission as we've been journeying through our marks of mission. Now, just in case you've forgotten them, because I think this might be the last time we hear them for a while, here they are, and there will be a quiz later, so make sure you listen up, please. To proclaim the good news of the kingdom, number 1. To teach, baptize, and nurture believers, number 2. To respond to human need by loving service, number 3. To transform unjust structures of society, to challenge violence of every kind, and pursue peace and reconciliation, number 4. And finally, the thought that we will journey with today, to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. Now, I would be the first to say that these marks of mission are not perfect, but they do give us some focus as a church descendant from the apostles, of those sent ones, for what we should be doing, about how we might focus our minds. I had a quick look back, and I realised that these were adopted in 96 and were debated far before then. Now, for a young whippersnapper like me, that seems quite some time ago, but time has a funny way of moving. For others, it may seem quite recent. But I think this 5th mark of mission actually is one that has moved more, not less, into our shared narrative as a church, but as countries and as a world, because we've seen an increased knowledge of climate change. We've seen extreme population growth. We've seen rampant consumption in our societies of a diminishing amount of the world's resources. In effect, even since these were written, we have seen our world changed even further forever. Now, without wishing to trivialize this topic, whenever I think about it, I'm drawn to one of my favourite songs, which is from Joni Mitchell, Big Yellow Taxi. Now, I'm not sure if she wrote it for this purpose, but just in case you can't recall the lyrics, I won't sing them, don't panic. It goes a little bit like this. It says, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot." Now, I'm not sure if she had it in mind, like I say, but her tone and meaning, it gives depth and meaning to those lyrics. And it gives us that sense of when we look back at what has been, we have had missed opportunities. That there's a time now where change that has happened cannot be undone. And it seems to me that that is where we are when it comes to our stewardship of the world around us. It hits it home when you hear people such as Sir David Attenborough saying things like, "Our planet is heading for disaster." And you really do have to question what it is we have done. And so, as Christians, how do we think about this issue? How do we participate in creation care and renewal of life on earth? Well, excuse me for a moment in hopefully pointing out the obvious, but I'm not going to miss the opportunity. We had the reading from Genesis, the very beginning of Genesis, and it shows us this Christian ethic around creation, around the world, that has very deep roots. Because the Christian worldview perceives that the world is of divine creation, a creation of God. To speak the very word creation is to point towards a deep theological truth. And our first reading attempts to illustrate this, even though it was only part of the narrative. In it, we see the hand of God, the movement of the Spirit, as being central to the ordering of our world. Now, I do know that people have differing opinions on the type of writing that Genesis is, whether that be allegory, illustrative, or whether it be literal. And in this moment, I'm not really bothered which one of those or any of those thoughts you have, but what you do get drawn from that sense of the text is this Christian ethic that God is creative, and the creative God had agency in some way, shape, or form in the formation of our world. Now, just think about that for a second. That sets the bar pretty high in terms of how we as Christians should be viewing the world around us. It sets the bar pretty high for our responsibility to care for it, to be able to stand up when we see abuses in the world, and to be able to be counted on to find solutions in seeking the renewal and restoration of the world. The second of our two readings today, I'm hoping, is a familiar one to many of you. In it, we see Jesus highlighting the two greatest commandments, as he puts it: to love God with everything that you are, and to love your neighbour as yourself. Now, if we get truly honest for a second, we pretty much all know this. But I wonder how often and how good we are at really implementing it in our lives. I know I, for one, fall short. It appears to me that as a human race, we are critically connected to each other through the world, through our shared life. We are all global citizens. And as such, we should be doing all we can to safeguard creation, to safeguard the world, because it is an act of loving our neighbours. Why, you might ask? Well, we know that climate change is having a devastating effect on many of the world's poorest nations. Crops failing, extreme weather bringing untold difficulty. And then, not to mention rising sea levels, the joy of richer nations sending over their rubbish to poorer nations to store it in their backyard. The sea turning into a massive rubbish dump full of plastic. The list can just go on. And I think that these two key things, having a creative God and having a responsibility to our neighbours in its widest possible sense, make our care for the earth's resources in the essential bracket for what it means to follow God in this time, particularly beyond the pandemic. The problem feels overwhelming, and we can feel so powerless. And there is also those who say this, maybe you've heard it: what on earth has the church got to do with this anyway? Keep it to your personal devotion. Don't comment on things you don't understand. Maybe you've heard such sentiments yourself. Well, I want to share with you a quote from a professor and author and a US top advisor on climate change, a gentleman called Gus Spieth, I think that's how you pronounce it. And it says this. It says, "I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy, And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. The thing is, when the church functions at its best, it is a remarkable vehicle for radical transformation in individuals and in society. It is a place where we consider what it is to be human, where we challenge ourselves to live lives that honour God and reflect Jesus. Yes, we might fall down, but we are a people on a journey trying to look more like Jesus. I know the power of the transformation of God in my own life, for God truly changed my life. And I suggest to you that mission beyond COVID must actively engage even further with creation care. I suggest to you that the church is well placed to speak powerfully, maybe not in a scientific response, but we can speak about a human and spiritual response. It is the business of the church. People are now seeing laid bare the impacts of our own selfishness. And as a church, we must be ready to engage. So I say, let's engage in the language of change. Let's reclaim community. Let's reclaim an ethic of loving our neighbour, of service, of sacrifice, of unity. Each and everyone, here and in the global church, has a role to play. Will you play yours? Amen.